Welcome to the introduction video of the Developer's Guide for the Integrated Data Pipeline. I am Major Quinzel Eric Chestnut II, creator and co-founder of the Integrated Data Pipeline. This introduction video will cover the following topics. First, I will cover the purpose of the Developer's Guide. Next, I will introduce the ANS concept and how IDP fits within the ANS model. Then I will share IDP's story, its entire story, by providing a detailed history of IDP and describe how IDP has evolved through time to integrate all the components of the initial entry training enterprise. Lastly, I will conclude this intro video by describing the framework of IDP through its three components, and then demonstrate IDP's effectiveness through illustrative examples of those components. The purpose of this developer's guide is to provide a comprehensive series of technical, step-by-step instructional videos designed to enable the ORSAs and data engineers from USEREC's C2DAO team to build, deploy, and sustain IDP 4.0 across the fourth generation enterprise. The knowledge, tools, and instructional depth contained within this guide is intended to empower our trusted agents to deliver a fully unified, enterprise-grade authoritative data system. Before diving into IDP at the micro level, I want to introduce the ANS model at the macro level. I recently authored a book entitled The Autonomic Nervous System of the Fourth Generation Enterprise. After the editorial process is complete, I am expecting the book to publish around the fall of 2027. Within this 62-page monograph, I describe the fourth generation enterprise as a living being with a real autonomic nervous system. In biology, the term autonomic describes processes the body performs without the brain having to think about it, such as the heart beating, or breathing, or even temperature regulation. However, the brain cannot autonomically respond to various external or internal conditions if it lacks self-awareness internally or awareness of changes in the external environment. Thus, to achieve awareness, every nervous system has three organs: a spine that establishes and carries all signals each direction, both to the brain and to the nerve endings; nerves, which are responsible for initial sensory and movement; and a brain, which is fed by the spine and the nerves. The brain interprets reality and subsequently achieves awareness, both internally and externally. Within the fourth generation enterprise, AIE will be the identity spine. From a data architectural perspective, identity columns, such as name, rank, pay grade, DoD ID, sex, service component, and even MOS, will be established in AIE long before the candidate arrives to an Army reception battalion. In the same light, IDP 4.0 will serve as the movement nerve that carries that identity no matter where the trainee goes. When the trainee is transferred to a new UIC or even a new installation, or when the trainee scans into a different building or bay outside of their training unit's typical location, or when the trainee scans into an airport for holiday block leave operations, or even when the trainee scans complete for optometry during reception and processing. IDP 4.0 will track their movement, their status, and their progress in real time without recreating the identity already established by AIE. Lastly, within the ANS model, Vantage will serve as the analytical brain that empowers senior leaders to accurately interpret the reality on the ground. Although IDP's Power BI dashboards will be able to provide the same level of instant clarity, if not more than Vantage, the Army has chosen Vantage to serve as its authoritative system of shared understanding. While ground level users will always be able to leverage the speed and accuracy of IDP dashboards, I acknowledge that many of our senior leaders prefer to view their common operating picture only in Vantage. Therefore, Once AIE and IDP have reached their full enterprise form, our enterprise must ensure that both systems feed Vantage to empower it to provide the highest level of shared understanding through visualization. Each organ, AIE, IDP, and Vantage, has a distinct purpose. None can replace the others. None can truly compensate for the absence of another, and together they form the autonomic layer the enterprise has been missing. Now we transition to the micro level. What is IDP? The Integrated Data Pipeline is a zero cost, customizable, and transactional knowledge management platform designed to serve as the system of record for the initial entry training enterprise by conducting 4 tasks that no other system can perform. Number one, provide accurate visibility of all trainee movement, progress, and status in real time from arrival at reception through AIT graduation. Number two, measure efficiencies within IET processes. Number three, facilitate feedback loops throughout the force generation enterprise. And number four, archive historical data for enterprise level trend analysis. In the early stages of IDP's development and utilization, many questioned its relevance by asking why we would even need such a system when we already have authoritative data sources such as IPSE, RecMod, Vantage, and even AIE on the horizon in the near future. To answer this question, Chapter 2 of my book utilizes personification to illustrate the relationship between RecMod and IPSE. Contrary to popular belief, trainees are not arrived and properly slotted in IPSE the day they join the Army and arrive to reception. In fact, the earliest a trainee can be properly accounted for in IPSE is typically after the 3rd or 4th week of basic training. And that is assuming RecMod successfully sends what we call the S file to IPSE without any errors blocking that transaction. That is why the training installations were forced to establish local Tiger teams to address and manually fix the errors preventing trainees from being properly arrived to their respective training units in IPSE. We call this process the ARIS-IPSE reconciliation process. However, IDP tracks all training accountability and movement in real time without suffering the delays that plague our systems of record. This is because IDP users perform the transactions the same day of the event. For example, when 200 trainees ship to their basic training unit, an IDP user selects all 200 names and then clicks the Ship to BCT button on the spot. This enables the trainee per stat in IDP to be accurate in real time, unlike IPSE's readiness rosters. Now, what about RecMod? Under current business processes, the final transaction in RecMod is shipping the trainee from reception to basic training. However, IDP carries that trainee's identity forward all the way through the end of AIT. Additionally, RecMod was never designed to track progress and statuses like IDP. Now, as for AIE, which will eventually replace RecMod in its entirety, the enterprise must be judicious when deciding how far to expand AIE utilization within the IET enterprise's enlisted mission. When building enterprise-level solutions, the two most valuable resources the enterprise must protect is time and money. The financial cost of just one additional AIE license will be considerably greater than granting a new user IDP access. And more importantly, the time required to expand AIE to each training brigade, to include the brigades and installations that conduct AIT, would take away from the time needed to address special missions and the officer accessions mission. As the incoming director of the AIE functional team, I acknowledge that our team will eventually have to conclude our efforts for the enlisted mission and refocus our energy towards officer accessions. Doing so sooner rather than later will empower the Army to discontinue legacy systems we're still currently paying for. Lastly, Vantage is not designed to operate as a transactional tool like IDP. In 2025, when CIMT attempted to replicate IDP inside of Vantage, although their intent was sound, the overall project fell through due to absence of shared understanding of ground level requirements. I will go deeper into the context of that scenario later in this presentation. But first, let's dive into the robust history of IDP. It's important that I start from the very beginning, January of 2024. At the time, I was the Battalion XO of 95th AG Reception Battalion in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Although I had only been in the seat for about 4 months, I was learning from one of the most experienced leaders the Accessions Enterprise had ever seen. My boss, Lieutenant Colonel Michael W. Halter Jr., remains one of the only people I've ever met that served in all 3 components of the Accessions triad. He had served in recruiting twice. He had been a MEPS commander, all before becoming my battalion commander in reception. To add icing on the cake, his CSM, Command Sergeant Major Ramel Boyd, had the same experience after having served in both recruiting and MEPS as well. Despite me being brand new to the Accessions Enterprise, these 2 leaders were the perfect match to groom and develop my understanding for the way ahead. Not only did they teach me about the motivating factors within the recruiting paradigm and the various challenges within MEPCOM, they also took the time to educate me on the value of a feedback loop to USAREC and MEPS, which was non-existent at that time. Specifically, Lieutenant Colonel Halter emphasized the consequences of the enterprise operating in silos rather than as an integrated and unified organization. This is precisely why he wasted no time correcting me when I presented my initial idea as to what we should name officially our new initiative. On February 26, 2024, I remember walking into the battalion conference room with confidence, believing I had come up with the perfect name. Sir, I figured it out. We should call it IDP, the Instant Data Pipeline. About a month before this encounter, January 17th to be exact, Lieutenant Colonel Halter directed me to explore ideas that would bring his vision to life. So over the next month, I experimented with scanners, Excel formulas, and even discovered how to convert unique identifiers into QR codes without having to pay for any additional software. I started implementing these discoveries within our reception business processes, and by mid-February, I had designed what we currently know as IDP 1.0, the platform each reception station would use to scan the trainee's QR code once they were complete at that station. Once I realized that a simple scan would instantly update multiple data fields all at the same time, I just knew the name of our new project absolutely had to include the word instant in it. But my boss knew better. And he didn't even blink when I presented my idea to him. He said, I like the acronym, but the I will not stand for instant. The word instant will not land on the senior leaders in our enterprise in a manner that does this initiative justice. No, XO, hear me out. The I will stand for integrated. We aim to integrate all the components of the Accessions Enterprise and the IET Enterprise. He said, to many, my vision will seem unrealistic because it is difficult to establish enterprise-level solutions from a tactical seat. But listen to me, XO, make no mistake about it. This initiative, this moment, it starts with us. And we will eventually get our opportunity to share the value of this idea with the Army. Now, it's fair to say that his words that day ignited a fire within me that I have held on to ever since, even after he departed. Not only did I understand why the name Instant Data Pipeline would not have served this system justice, I also immediately understood why the name RDP, which was another idea thrown out by one of our staff members, would have marginalized the scope of his vision as well. The name Reception Data Pipeline would have implied a few things that would have been incongruent with my boss's vision. First, it would have implied that we aim to only track reception operations, not BCT or AIT. Secondly, the biggest problem our brigade was struggling to solve at that time was not reception tracking, it was accurate trainee accountability. To be candid, the trainee per stat was a nightmare. Not because of any form of incompetence, let me be clear, it was because the system of record, IPSE, could not be trusted in the training environment. IDP was the first platform to tackle this problem head on, even though there was a high rate of data fratricide from user errors, which I will unpack later in this presentation. Lastly, had we named this new system RDP, the Reception Data Pipeline, it would have also implied that we were not interested in facilitating a feedback loop to the rest of the enterprise the way my boss had envisioned. Now, in concluding the history portion of this presentation, I think it's important to lay out IDP's timeline with detailed context. For example, although IDP 1.0 represented the first time an Army organization operationalized an integrated personnel tracking solution for the training environment, its scalability was limited because it relied on users following step-by-step instructions in a collection of Excel spreadsheets error-free. Despite exhausting efforts to provide an IDP handbook and an IDP cheat sheet, I learned a very hard lesson during the IDP 1.0 era. What can go wrong will go wrong when users are given the option to interact with raw data in the same location the data is housed, especially without any restrictive measures to prevent data fratricide. The IDP era, or the IDP 1.0 era, lasted over a year at Fort Sill, not because the system was perfect, but because it was just simply the best we had at that time. Now, fast forward 8 months later, August of 2024. We flew to Newport News, Virginia to present IDP at the CIMT Leaders Forum. Our presentation was compelling, and we sold IMT leadership on the overall IDP concept. However, we failed to educate them on the true requirements on the ground that IDP was already solving, both for reception and for BCT. We also failed to describe the development trajectory IDP was already on. Now, by that time, I knew IDP would eventually have to evolve, but I just didn't know how just yet. Thus, the CIMT CG, who just happened to be the TRADOX DCG at the time, decided to fully buy into the IDP concept after our presentation. But he wasn't bought into the methodology IDP 1.0 used with Excel spreadsheets, and rightfully so. So in February of 2025, just 2 months before we started developing IDP 2.0, the CIMT CG announced that the enterprise would develop its own version of IDP inside of Vantage and deploy it for utilization across all 4 installations. However, in reality, that project did fall through, as I previously mentioned, for various reasons. To sum it up, we presented IDP, but CIMT heard RDP. Their Vantage project was designed as a reception data pipeline. And to be candid, it was still vastly underdeveloped at the time of deployment. Reception operators saw it as a legitimate regression from IDP 1.0, not as a progressive upgrade. Fast forward to April 1st, 2025. We began developing IDP 2.0, finally migrating away from Excel to SharePoint lists and Power Apps. The discovery of Power Apps represented our first opportunity to create an interface whereby users only interact with the app, thus protecting the data. However, although this was obviously going to be a massive upgrade from 1.0, my NCO and I noticed a few obvious limitations within 30 days of development. For instance, first, SharePoint lists could only hold a certain amount of data columns, unlike Excel. Additionally, the IDP 2.0 concept relied on Power Automate flows rather than code. And unfortunately, Power Automate flows fail at times. And even if the failure rate is less than 1%, anything higher than 0% is still too high for an enterprise level transactional tool. However, on Friday evening, May 2nd, 2025, I received a phone call that changed the trajectory of my work. A data engineer associated with the Tradoc CIO was told to give me a call after they had caught wind of the potential impact IDP could have at the enterprise level. That night, a man by the name of Mr. DeKaiser informed me that we had already had access to the same backend that my NCO had been recommending for months. Dataverse. Before this call, we had already agreed internally that if we ever got our hands on Dataverse, we would abandon the IDP 2.0 concept altogether and start from scratch with IDP 3.0. However, we were repeatedly told that Dataverse was far too expensive and the Army couldn't afford the license yet. But that night, on that call, Mr. DeKaiser informed me there was a free version of Dataverse we could use immediately. Dataverse for Teams. So we wasted no time. We abandoned IDP 2.0 and everything we had just developed over the last 30 days. Now, although my NCO departed our organization soon thereafter, it didn't matter. Even in his absence, I already had all the tools I needed to finish the journey. By mid-August 2025, our entire brigade, both BCT and reception, made the full transition from IDP 1.0 to IDP 3.0. Today, IDP 3.0 remains by far the most intricate personnel tracking system of the fourth generation enterprise. However, there is still one key limitation in the team's environment. It's called the delegation limitation. Now, to summarize this limitation, a gallery inside of Power Apps for Teams can only see the first 2,000 records of a Dataverse table. And considering our training brigade has well over that amount of trainees, this posed an immediate problem. The solution to this problem was pretty complex, but it worked. It's called collections. However, even that solution came with some unintended consequences, such as users having to log all the way out of the app after visiting a transactional page, and then having to log all the way back into the app for the collections to refresh. Now, although that may not seem like a major inconvenience on the surface, it's definitely a clear opportunity for IDP 4.0 to upgrade the pain point that IDP 3.0 users complain about the most. Which brings me to IDP 4.0, formerly known as DAP. Originally, Userex C2 DAO team was going to name this project the Data Analytics Platform, DAP. But after assessing the scope of IDP 3.0, Lieutenant Colonel Melissa Miller, Userex Chief of Data Integration, chose to rename the project IDP 4.0 in honor of the work previously completed toward this cause. Unlike IDP 3.0, the 4.0 environment will not suffer from any delegation limitations because the backend will be a combination of full Dataverse and SQL servers. More importantly, IDP 4.0 will leverage Azure Synapse as the data warehouse. Now that we've completed the full history and phase progression of IDP, we're ready to look at the journey the system was built to support. This slide shows the traditional initial entry training golden path, the simplest, most common route a trainee takes into the Army. This journey begins at the recruiting station and flows into MEPS. From MEPS, the trainee ships to the reception battalion and then proceeds through the BCT to AIT path or the OSIT path before arriving to their first duty station. Now, I want to highlight two sets of boundaries that tremendously matter for the understanding of this architecture: the AIE boundaries and the IDP boundaries. On this path, the AIE user start point is the recruiting station, and the AIE user endpoint is after the trainee departs the reception battalion and is handed off into the training pipeline. AIE's responsibility is identity, confirming who the trainee is, closing the loop on accessions, and passing that identity downstream. The IDP user start point is located at the reception battalion. This is the first moment IDP takes custody of the trainee's movement. From the second the trainee arrives at reception, IDP tracks their location, status, progress, and transitions. The IDP user endpoint is graduation of AIT or OSIT, depending on the training path. That means IDP carries the movement responsibility all the way through BCT, OSIT, and AIT, and does not release that responsibility until the trainee has graduated from either of those paths. Even in this so-called simple path, there's nothing simple about the number of handoffs, the number of organizations involved, and the degree of accuracy required to maintain visibility across the enterprise. The golden path is the baseline. It's the cleanest, simplest version of this journey. But as you will see on the next few slides, the Army's actual trainee flow is far more complex. That complexity is exactly why IDP 4.0 has to become the enterprise movement nerve, because nothing else can unify all these trajectories with real-time accuracy. Now that we've seen the traditional golden path, this slide introduces the second major trajectory, the Future Soldier Prep Course pathway. This is where the trainee flow begins to branch in ways the Army was never structurally tracking in a unified way before IDP. You'll notice that instead of shipping to MEPS directly into one of the 4 reception battalions, trainees in this pathway only go to 120th AG Reception Battalion, which is in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, before shipping to Future Soldier Prep. Then, depending on their newly awarded MOS upon completion of Future Soldier Prep, once they return to 120th AG Reception Battalion, they will either transship to 30th, 43rd, or 95th AG Reception Battalion via an interpost, what we call transship, or they will ship directly to BCT locally at Fort Jackson. These movements are not linear. They are not predictable without a real-time enterprise system tracking every single handoff. Now, back to those boundaries. The AIE boundary of this pathway will look similar to what we discussed in the Golden Path. The AIE user start point is at the recruiting station. The AIE user endpoint is the trainee's transition from reception to BCT or OSIT. This remains consistent with the ANS model. AIE owns the identity confirmation and accessions closure. Now for the IDP boundaries. The IDP boundaries of this pathway are also similar to the Golden Path. The IDP user start point will be at 120th AG Reception Battalion during the IDP 4.0 era. The IDP user endpoint remains at AIT or OSIT graduation. So this means IDP becomes the authoritative movement system long before the trainee reaches BCT and maintains custody of that movement across every routing, every hold, every reassignment, and every schoolhouse transition. This slide illustrates why IDP cannot be a local tool and why IDP 4.0 has to exist. Fort Jackson's Future Soldier Prep pathway is not currently tracked, not in its entirety, by Fort Sill's IDP 3.0. So this pathway introduces unpredictable routing, multiple reception variants, inter-installation transfers that the enterprise simply could not see in real time under legacy systems. And as we continue on to the next slide, you'll see the third major trajectory, ESL, which adds even more complexity. Every one of these pathways reinforces the same truth. IDP must unify the entire fourth generation enterprise, not just one installation or one phase of training. This slide introduces the third major trajectory of the IET enterprise, the ESL pathway. This pathway includes trainees who require English language training before entering basic combat training. This is not a small deviation. It is an entirely different operational lane that historically lacked enterprise-wide visibility. In this flow, trainees ship from MEPS to the 95th AG Reception Battalion in Fort Sill with a temporary MOS of 09 Charlie. For reception operators at 95th AG, this is one of the indicators that the trainee is specifically processing as a future ESL shipper. Then they transship to what we call DLI ELC, the Defense Language Institute English Language Center in Texas. Now, after completing ESL, they are awarded their new MOS, and then they transship again to any of the 4 reception battalions, which is determined by their newly awarded MOS. Just like the future soldier prep pathway, this track adds multiple potential movements, inter-post transfers, and shifts between reception battalions. None of these movements follow a strictly predictable pattern, and none were centrally tracked in real time before IDP. Now, as you can imagine, the AIE boundaries for this pathway will remain the same as the others. The AIE user start point is the recruiting station. The AIE user endpoint is when the trainee departs reception and moves into the training pipeline. AIE continues to perform identity confirmation, accessions closure, and authoritative handoff of that identity into the enterprise. The boundary does not change just because the pathway is different. So the same remains for the IDP boundaries as well. The IDP user start point is the 95th AG Reception Battalion. The IDP user endpoint is AIT or OSIT graduation. Again, this slide reinforces the same architectural truth as the previous ones. Once the trainee arrives at reception, IDP owns movement visibility all the way until the end of IET graduation requirements are completed by the trainee. The ESL pathway is one of the clearest examples of why IDP 4.0 has to become an enterprise-wide movement nerve. These trainees don't follow a straight line. They move between installations, between components, between organizational owners. No legacy system was built to maintain persistent accountability across this entire pathway. But with IDP 4.0, every ESL trainee's movement is going to be captured and visible in real time across the IET enterprise. This is the power of integrating IDP with the autonomic nervous system framework. Now, when Lieutenant Colonel Halter and I co-authored the IDP white paper back in the summer of 2024, we emphasized the difference between IDP as a knowledge management system versus IDP as a knowledge management philosophy. In both cases, there are 3 components of IDP: the input, the throughput, and the output. But before we unpack IDP as a knowledge management system, I want to clarify the definition of the term input from the perspective of IDP as a philosophy. So from within this perspective, input criteria as a philosophy is any question that the throughput tools or output tools must be designed to satisfy. That said, according to the philosophy, here are the 5 fundamental questions, also known as input criteria, that IDP 4.0 throughput tools and output tools must satisfy. These are not abstract questions. These are questions every commander, every operation style, every staff section, and every gaining unit asks every single day. Number 1, who are they? This speaks to data accuracy. This is the identity component. Before anything else, one thing remains true. Identity must precede movement. So, before anything else, the enterprise must know exactly who that trainee is. This is the foundation of every downstream process. And it's why AIE serves as the identity spine inside the ANS model. Number two, where are they? Now, this speaks to location and which unit has custody of the trainee. Across all pathways we just reviewed, a trainee may pass through multiple reception battalions: DLI, ELC, Future Soldier Prep, BCT, OSIT, AIT, Interpost routing, temporary holds. If the enterprise cannot answer where someone is right now, not a week from now after a system of record has properly ingested a signal from a different system, then it cannot maintain accountability. Number three, where are they going next? Now, this speaks to matriculation. This is the directional logic of the enterprise. It's not enough to know where the trainee is. Leaders need to know where that trainee is supposed to go next, whether they are cleared to move, and whether the gaining organization is ready to receive them. Number four, when are they going there? Now, this speaks to predictability. Movement is operational. It has timelines, friction points, windows. Commanders require predictability to synchronize transportation, cadre, capacity, training throughput, and class lineup. Without predictability, the entire enterprise, experiences delays. And number five, what else must they complete before they can move forward? Now, this speaks to monitoring progress. Every pathway has requirements: medical, legal, administrative, physical, academic. IDP must give leaders a way to see every outstanding requirement so they can assess readiness to transition. We call this movement readiness in the training environment. This is essential for decision making and for reducing bottlenecks. Although there are many questions that arise in the training environment that should be addressed by IDP, these 5 questions form the foundation of IDP's input criteria. They are the reason that IDP exists. They are the questions no previous system could answer across all major pathways. And they are what separate a local tracking tool from a true enterprise movement nerve. From this point forward in the guide, everything we build, every app, every table, every automation, every dashboard is designed to answer these 5 questions with precision, consistency, and real-time accuracy across the entire fourth generation enterprise. Now, everything inside of IDP 3.0 in its current state is built around the 3 components of IDP: the input, the throughput, and the output. However, now we can unpack the meaning of input from the perspective of IDP as a knowledge management system, which is separate from IDP as a knowledge management philosophy. So, inside of IDP, the IDP 3.0 system, the input is the Dataverse table. This is where the data lives. The Dataverse table is the authoritative storage layer that houses every single record, every update, every field, everything that makes IDP function. It's the ground truth for the enterprise. This is what captures who the trainee is, where the trainee is, what their status is, what requirements they've completed, what movements have occurred or are pending. If the data does not exist here, it does not exist in the pipeline anywhere. Number 2, the throughput is the app, also known as Power Apps. Power Apps is the tool that IDP users log into to make all changes to the data. Anytime a user updates a status, logs a movement, completes an in-processing action, or makes a correction, they are interacting with the throughput layer. This is the transactional engine. It's where reception, BCT, OSIT, AIT, Future Soldier Prep, ESL, and other operational users actually touch the system. This is the nervous system's nerve impulses. the real-time signals that make IDP dynamic. Then the output is the dashboard, also known as Power BI. The output layer visualizes the data. Power BI transforms all those transactions into dashboards, reports, drill downs, filters, and metrics, giving commanders and staff shared understanding they need to make decisions. This is where the enterprise sees the big picture. Pipeline throughput, population snapshots, pending movements, accountability, trainee status distribution, trends and friction points. This layer translates raw transactions into operational intelligence. Taken together, the input, throughput, and output form the perfect synergy for enterprise-level shared understanding. Dataverse stores it, Power Apps changes it, Power BI displays it. This structure gives us real-time movement nerve that spans across the entire IET enterprise, from reception all the way to the first duty station, while also providing a feedback loop throughout the fourth generation enterprise. Before concluding this intro video, let's review a couple of examples of how IDP 3.0 accomplishes this as a knowledge management system. The first example to demonstrate the synergy of IDP 3.0 is the bed space COP, which is fed by our bed space scanning process at Fort Sill. Let's start with the input component of this example, which is the Dataverse table where all the data is housed. Notice the first 4 columns of data display the timestamp of the most recent scan into a building, the building number, the wing or section of that building, and the specific bay inside that wing. Now let's transition to the throughput component of this example. To best understand this process, it is important to note that there are only 3 physical requirements to make this work. First, the laptop itself with IDP 3.0 access. Second, the mouse, which is connected to the laptop via one of the USB ports. And the scanner, which is also connected to that laptop via the other USB port. On the BedSpace scanning app, each training unit has a page where their trainees scan into their respective bay, and each bay has 2 fields that can process a new timestamp. The top field is coded to receive a CAC scan. To do so, the IDP user clicks inside that field with the mouse or the mouse pad, and then the trainee scans their CAC with the scanner. Now, typically, the training unit will make everyone who is going into bay number 1 line up first, so they are all scanning into the same field as they're walking into their bay without having to stop. Then they do the exact same thing for the other 3 bays in order. However, there are scenarios in which a trainee may have misplaced their CAC card, or the CAC is damaged and just has not been replaced yet. In that scenario, the IDP user would click inside of the bottom field for that specific bay and manually type or paste the trainee's DoD ID number. Now, to quickly identify the trainee's DoD ID number, the user can begin typing the last name of the trainee in the search by name field of the gallery, and then highlight the DoD ID number to copy once it appears in the gallery. Once the DoD ID number is in the bottom field, pressing the enter button on the keyboard conducts the exact same transaction as scanning the CAC in the top field. Although our output visualizations are normally facilitated by our Power BI dashboard, the BedSpace COP is an exception to that rule. It's one of the examples where the app is also used as an output tool. So let's start with the brigade level BedSpace COP. As you can see, the number of trainees currently in the brigade versus the number of trainees who have scanned into a specific bay are both displayed at the top of the screen. Additionally, the ability to search by name or DoD ID number as a quick search feature is available to utilize rather than having to scroll through a gallery that lists over 1,000 trainees in it. This capability is actually available in every gallery within IDP 3.0. If the IDP user were to click a specific battalion on this page, such as 140th Field Artillery Battalion, one of the basic training battalions in our brigade, the app would then immediately navigate that battalion level screen for 140th FA. The same process applies to the battery level. If the user were to select a specific battery, such as Charlie Battery, the app would immediately navigate to the bed space cop for Charlie 140th. Then finally, if the user were to choose bay number 3, the app would immediately navigate to the page for that specific bay. The bay level is the lowest level of the bed space cop. Now let's take a quick glance at the highest level of the bed space cop, the installation level. As you can see, there are 3 training brigades on Fort Sill, the Fires Center of Excellence, also known as FCO. 434 Field Artillery Brigade is the basic training brigade, while 30th ADA and 428 FA are the brigades that conduct AIT. In this example, only two brigades are using IDP 3.0 for bed space scanning, and that's 30th and 434. Also take note that the color legend serves as a visual indicator for senior leaders to alert them when the bed space capacity is approaching its max in any given AO. However, that visual indicator only works when IDP utilization is mandated and enforced by senior leaders. Most importantly, this page only represents the second highest level of the bed space cop's intended use. In IDP 4.0, the enterprise level would display all 4 training installations and potentially even include AIT installations such as Fort Sam Houston or Fort Huachuca, if the utilization mandate were to cover the entire fourth generation enterprise. The second example we're going to use to demonstrate the synergy of IDP 3.0 is holiday block leave operations, also known as HBL operations. And we're going to use the Oklahoma City Airport as the example. For the input component of this example, notice 3 columns of the Dataverse table that display, number 1, the airport status as either checked in or checked out. Number 2, the scan in timestamp. And number 3, the scan out timestamp. Now for the throughput component of this example, notice there are 3 galleries on the OKC Airport departure page. The top gallery displays all travelers who have yet to scan into the airport. It also displays their scheduled flight departure time. The middle gallery displays all travelers who have scanned into the airport. This gallery also includes their scan-in timestamp underneath their flight departure time. But in this scenario, everyone has already either scanned out, which is why that gallery is blank, or they never scanned in. The bottom gallery displays all travelers who have scanned out of the airport, assuming the organization feels like scanning out of the airport is an important step to complete. Additionally, notice the scan out timestamp underneath the scheduled departure time of the flight. This provides a quick visual guesstimate of how much time the traveler actually had after being released by the unit to catch their flight. Lastly, notice the scanning fields and typing fields are identical to the bed space scanning pages. Although this example is for a different mission, the scanning concept remains the same. For the output component of this example, welcome to the IDP 3.0 Power BI dashboard. Notice the legend which provides the visual color code for the pie charts. In this example, if I were to click inside the black portion of the pie chart, I would be specifically drilling down into the 27 names who have not scanned into the airport yet. The gallery in the bottom right corner would immediately display those 27 travelers only, which could be exported to Excel or printed out by the user if necessary. Also, notice how each dot on the map of the United States represents a traveler from a specific brigade. Each dot moves across the map each time that specific trainee scans in or out of a location. And once their scheduled flight departure time is a time in the past, IDP users can officially depart them from the airport, which automatically moves their dot on the map from that airport to the location associated with their leave address. The third example to demonstrate the synergy of IDP 3.0 is the BCT Brigade departure transactions. Although there are various types of departure transactions from basic combat training, we will focus specifically on graduated, separated, and refrad in this example. Not only do you see the type of departure in the first column, you can also see who departed that trainee and when they departed them as well. For the throughput component of this example, welcome to the Brigade Departure System inside the app, also known as BDS. This is the page that users navigate to depart trainees from the brigade or the installation. For the output component of this example, not only do you see the bar graphs which represent the departures, but to the left, you also see the brigade's departure analytics displayed for senior leader optics. As of now, 434 has a 92% graduation rate and an 8% attrition rate. Senior leaders are also able to see which training units are attriting the most. To dive deeper into this third example of the departure archive, let's explore the separated population of the departures. Before we begin, take notice of the soldier photo image column specifically designed to maintain the image of the trainee for visual verification processes. You will see a visual example of this on the next slide. But before we transition, take notice of the waiver columns. These columns are valuable indicators that facilitate the first ever feedback loop to USAREC and MEPCOM. It is also very important to note that the waiver column is not automatically populated by RecMod's daily processing roster. Despite multiple attempts to communicate to the enterprise the importance of including this data and the code for the waiver type within the DPR, we never accomplished that change within the IDP 3.0 era, thus opening the door for another advancement with IDP 4.0. Now, for the throughput portion of this example, the reception holding unit, also known as the RHU, is responsible for answering multiple questions when in processing a trainee who will be separating from the Army. First, notice the image of the trainee populates as they are in processing her. Additionally, notice that two of the questions that are included in the intake process are whether she received a waiver to join the Army, and if so, is her chapter reason correlated to her waiver reason? Again, the RHU must go through multiple steps and even sometimes coordinate externally to validate if that trainee really received a waiver, because the data is not automatically provided by RecMod's DPR and subsequently not by IDP 3.0. Now, for the output portion of this example, we revisit the departure archive on the dashboard. Take notice that when the user drills down into the separated population, they can see the trainees, whether or not the trainee received a waiver to join the Army, and if there's a correlation between that waiver reason and the reason they're separated. Here is where the complete feedback loop snaps into place. If someone in USAREC found a trainee in the departure archive who matched the criteria they were looking for and wanted to know which of their recruiting stations this trainee came from, they could navigate to the recruiting archive page of the dashboard and search for them by name or by DoD ID number. And when the IDP user scrolls to the right inside the gallery, they can identify which recruiting station that trainee came from. The same feedback loop applies to MEPCOM via the MEPS archive page of the dashboard. Notice the MEP station is listed directly next to the trainee's name. And when the IDP user scrolls to the right inside the gallery, they can even identify the contact number of that MEP station. The final example I will use to demonstrate the synergy of IDP 3.0 is reception operations. For the input component of this example, let's take a look at the optometry station. Here, you can see the trainee status for that station, along with who cleared them at that station, and even the exact time they cleared them. For the throughput component of this example, let's take a look at the optometry scanning page inside the app. It's important to remember that trainees do not have a CAC upon arriving to reception. Therefore, unlike bed space scanning and HBL scanning, reception scanning is facilitated by the QR code of the volunteer number, not by the DoD ID from the CAC. As a result, there is only one field on this page, and it doesn't matter if the user types the volunteer number or scans it. The transaction will have the same result either way. For the output component of this final example, we turn back to the IDP 3.0 Power BI dashboard. On the reception operations page, you can clearly see the status for optometry, as well as every other reception agency. I will dive deeper into the detailed reception mission set in a later video of the Developer's Guide. Thank you for watching the introduction video of the Developer's Guide. And on behalf of the Fourth Generation Enterprise, welcome to the Integrated Data Pipeline.